They didn't see a veteran, just an old man with stiff knees and a government envelope. That's what the young woman behind the bank counter muttered to her coworker, loud enough for the customers to hear but quiet enough to pretend she hadn't meant it. Probably trying to cash a bingo flyer, she snickered as she reached for the shredder behind her desk. The man didn't raise his voice, didn't explain, didn't plead. Just gently placed the check between her fingers and waited. She never even looked at the watermark, she just fed it through the machine, one hum, one flicker of disrespect, and in an instant, a month's worth of recognition was turned into ribbons of waste paper. The man blinked once, steady. No anger in his breath. Just something else, something old, something practiced. He gathered his empty envelope and walked toward the bench outside, unbothered by the laughter fading behind him. What they didn't know, what no one in that building cared enough to notice, was the weight behind that name at Charles Boone, or the fine print on that check that had just been destroyed. Because 5 minutes later, a black government SUV rolled up to the curb, and the doors didn't open quickly. They opened carefully. And when the woman stepped out, no badge, no commotion, just a charcoal gray suit and silver streaks in her hair, the air in that bank changed. She wasn't here for a transaction. She was here for a reckoning. If you agree that no veteran should be dismissed by someone too arrogant to read a name, then like and subscribe. Because this story is about what happens when the silence you ignored turns out to be the voice you answer to. It started just before noon on a Monday, the kind of slow, rainy day where the air feels like a sign no one wants to release. Charles Boone, 83, walked into the Glenview First Union Bank in a Sunday jacket, navy wool, brass buttons dulled by time, and a white envelope pressed flat in his hand. He had walked 3 blocks in a drizzle just to hand it over in person. He always did. Not out of stubbornness, but because that's how he was taught. Respect is given face to face. The teller, Madison, early 20s, high ponytail, gold hoops, and phone tucked halfway under the counter, looked up with practiced disinterest. "Can I help you?" she asked, barely masking her boredom. Charles nodded, sliding the envelope gently toward her. "Check from the Treasury. I'd like to deposit it, please." She sighed, opened it, and the moment her eyes landed on the old paper, she paused, not out of reverence, but disbelief. "Sir, this is... it doesn't even have a routing QR. This can't be real." She flipped it once, then twice. "You can't just print something like this and expect..." Charles interrupted only to say, softly, "That's from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's issued to medal recipients through a direct government channel. It's legitimate." Madison looked over to her colleague, giggled under her breath, then, with a flourish only someone proud of being ignorant can perform, walked the check to the back corner of the counter, dropped it into the industrial shredder, and pressed start. Charles stood still. He didn't blink. Not when the gears whirred, not when the paper vanished, not even when Madison turned back and said, "Sorry, sir. If you have questions, you can call the helpline. Or the museum." The manager, a man in a loose tie and tighter worldview, barely looked up when Charles asked to speak with someone. "She followed procedure," he mumbled. "We're required to be cautious." Charles nodded once. "Understood." Then he turned, stepped outside, and took a seat on the public bench across the lot. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the news. He called one number. The only number that mattered. No name in his contacts, just a single listing. Sparrow. He pressed dial and said only, "It just happened. Glenview branch." Then he hung up. Across the parking lot, Madison reapplied her lip gloss while bragging about catching another fake vet check, and the floor manager rolled his chair over to the next cube to tell the story again. Funnier this time. But when the matte black SUV pulled to the curb 5 minutes later, tinted windows, government plates, silent engine, no one noticed until the passenger door opened and a tall woman stepped out in leather heels that didn't click. They landed. Janice Reynolds, 56, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, walked into the Glenview Bank without announcement, without security, and without a smile. She didn't ask to speak with the manager. She walked straight up to Madison's station and laid a thin leather folder on the counter. "Is this her signature on the destruction log for this check?" Madison blinked. Yes. I thought it was fake. Reynolds opened the folder. Inside, a scanned copy of the check with verification seals, a Treasury watermark, and a medal identifier only issued to Direct Medal of Honor recipients. That check was issued to Charles Boone, she said calmly. He didn't need you to understand it. He needed you to process it. Madison stammered, but it looked like a veteran's benefits, because it was, Reynolds snapped, her voice now sharp enough to quiet the entire floor. And you shredded it. Without pause. Without due diligence. And with visible contempt. The floor manager stepped in, trying to smooth things over with a half smile. I think this is just a misunderstanding, ma'am, but Reynolds had already turned. This branch is under review. As of this moment, your teller is dismissed. Permanently blacklisted from handling federal funds. She pulled her ID from her pocket and placed it on the counter, gold, engraved, official. Secretary Janice Reynolds. And that man you dismissed? He once led the mission that saved my father's life. I don't care what the name on your badge says. His name is the one history will remember. And just like that, the room fell into the kind of silence that can't be taught. It's earned by power that arrives too late for your comfort, but just in time for justice. You could hear a pin drop on that marble floor the moment she said it. That man led the mission that saved my father's life. The silence wasn't polite, it was crushing. The kind of silence that feels like someone just kicked the oxygen out of the room. Madison's lip-glossed smile vanished. Her face collapsed inward like a dropped mask, trying to shrink behind the computer monitor. The branch manager opened his mouth to protest again, but Janice Reynolds didn't give him room. She turned her back to him mid-sentence. Her eyes locked on the entryway where Charles Boone had re-entered, at her request, with the same quiet dignity he always carried, still wearing that navy wool coat with the brass buttons, damp now with light rain. He didn't march in like a hero. He didn't even lift his chin. He just walked, slow, deliberate, like a man who'd spent his life walking into rooms that didn't expect him and changing their gravity anyway. Mr. Boone, Janice said, and this time it wasn't a government greeting, it was personal. Her voice softened just enough to honor what she was about to do. You are owed a public apology. But I know you won't want that. Charles gave a slow shake of his head. I want nothing public. I want integrity to mean something again. And with that, the Treasury Secretary reached into her briefcase and pulled out a replacement check. Not just any check, but one that had been hand-signed, hand-sealed, and escorted directly by her. This isn't a replacement, she told him. It's a recognition. He took it gently, nodding, and said only, appreciated. The room still hadn't exhaled. No one moved. No one whispered. It was like everyone inside that building had suddenly realized just how wrong they'd been, not just today, but likely many times before. One of the younger tellers leaned toward her coworker and murmured, "Why didn't we know who he was?" The answer came not from Janice, not from Boone, but from the security guard in the back, the one who'd watched it all unfold from behind the camera console. Because he didn't want you to know. That's what makes him who he is. As Janice and Boone spoke quietly near the vault, someone else pulled out their phone and searched the name of Charles Nathaniel Boone. The first result wasn't a LinkedIn profile. It wasn't even a military database. It was a declassified photo from 1971, black and white, dust-filtered, showing a younger Boone crouched in jungle foliage, surrounded by 3 wounded soldiers, applying field dressings with steady hands and fire behind him. Beneath it, Special Operations Rescue, Operation Hawkeye, 12 rescued, 0 lost. Unit Commander, Cian Boone. That image spread across the branch like wildfire. Phones were suddenly down low, whispers rising. Someone realized the initials CMB were etched on a plaque in the Veterans Hall 5 blocks away. That's him, someone mouthed. He's the one from Hawkeye? But Boone didn't speak of it. Not once. Not when Madison cried. Not when the branch manager tried to shake his hand. Not even when the regional banking rep rushed in, sweating through his collar, stammering legalese about standard compliance review. Boone said nothing. But Janice did. This man didn't demand compensation. He didn't file a complaint. He didn't call a lawyer. He made one call. To a number I gave him 5 years ago, after I finally met the man who saved my father's life in Laos. She turned back to the staff. He earned that number by saving people he barely knew. And when he was dismissed, again, he didn't shout. He simply alerted. That's what real leadership looks like. You could have heard the weight land on every shoulder. Madison, to her credit, was crying now, not performative tears, but the kind that come when you realize you're not just wrong, but careless with something sacred. She whispered through her hands, "I didn't know. I thought he was just—" She couldn't finish. Boone, hearing it, turned to her, not cruelly, not vindicatively. "That's the problem," he said. "You all think, just old. Just another vet. Just a check. Just paperwork. But you forget, just silence doesn't mean no story. It means you never asked." Then he turned back to Janice and gave a nod. "I'd like to go now." She offered him her arm. He didn't take it. He stood fine on his own. As they walked out together, an officer from the security desk asked quietly, "Where do we send a formal commendation?" Janice smiled. "You don't. He won't accept one. But what you can do is stop mistaking stillness for irrelevance." Outside, the rain had cleared. The sky was that bright kind of after-storm blue. Boone stood at the curb beside the black SUV, check tucked inside his coat, looking off into the distance like he already knew this story would ripple far beyond Glenview. And he was right. Because that night, a clip from the bank's security feed leaked, just a few seconds long, showing Boone standing silently while Madison laughed, showing the moment Janice placed the folder on the counter, and the camera catching the exact second her voice dropped when she said, "Medal of Honor." The video went viral, not for rage clicks, but for revelation. Commenters didn't scream. They apologized. Thousands of them. "My grandfather was like this. I think I walked past someone like him last week. How do we keep getting this wrong?" And in the middle of the noise, the stillness returned. Boone didn't post, didn't trend, didn't give interviews. He just went home. Because that's what he always did. He served, he protected, and then he let the world catch up on its own. But the next day, a small metal sign was quietly installed beside the teller booth at Glenview First Union. No cameras, no ribbon cutting, just a plaque. In honor of C. and Boone. For the value of vigilance. And the price of presumption. A few customers paused to read it. One left a folded flag on the bench outside. And the new teller working shift A had a dog tag looped around her wrist, not because someone told her to, but because someone finally understood why it mattered. You'd think that would be the end of it. An apology, a plaque, and a few managers quietly reshuffled into less public-facing positions. But when a man like Charles Boone walks through your life, even for 5 minutes, the echo doesn't leave. The Glenview branch reopened 2 days later under routine internal review, but every employee knew the real reason was sealed in silence. Madison was gone. Her name didn't show up on the schedule. Her email was locked out. Some said she left town. Others said she hadn't spoken since the incident, that she finally saw the footage herself, watched her own face twist into something smug, watched herself feed a veteran's check into a shredder like it was junk mail. Boone didn't have to say anything. The footage did. And yet Charles Boone never once checked the internet. He didn't tweet, didn't repost, didn't say, "Told you so." He just returned to the same quiet life he'd always led. Mornings at the memorial wall, afternoons with the folded flag on his shelf, evenings feeding the pigeons from the bench no one else used. The one beside the faded bronze statue of a man in uniform whose name most people had stopped reading. Except Boone hadn't. He still remembered everyone. Because they weren't just names, they were his. And that's where the ripple found its edge. Because someone else had been watching, not the public, not the press, but a young man named Ellis, just 22, working third-shift security at Glenview, who'd seen the entire incident on closed circuit. He'd been raised by his grandmother, his father long gone, his brother serving active duty overseas, and Ellis had never met a living Medal of Honor recipient before. When he saw Boone walk out that day without a word, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he did something most people never think to do. He asked. He found Boone at the memorial wall and approached slowly, respectfully, and asked the question the rest of the country had missed. "Sir, what was the mission?" Boone looked at him with eyes that had seen the cost of too many answers, but then, for the first time in years, he nodded once and replied, "Not the kind you name, just the kind you carry." And that was enough. Ellis went home and started reading. Not just articles, archives. Government records, declassified missions, obscure citations buried in scanned PDFs. And one night, he found it. A scanned letter from 1973. Hand-signed by a young lieutenant named Jameson, who later became the same General Langston that now oversaw the Treasury Special Operations Liaison Office. The letter described a covert op in Laos, one where 12 POWs were extracted under fire by a unit commander who went unnamed in official reports. He declined formal recognition, the letter read. Said the mission wasn't about one man. But I'll never forget the name on his boots bone. Ellis printed that letter, framed it, and brought it to the Glenview branch. He asked the new manager, a woman named Claudia, if it could hang beside the plaque. She said yes without hesitation. And 2 days later, Charles Boone walked in for his routine deposit and paused. Not because the line was long, not because the teller was nil, but because he saw something he hadn't seen in over 50 years, his own name, under a mission he buried. Claudia met him with a smile. "We thought it was time." Boone stared at it for a long moment, then turned to her and said, "I didn't do it for the wall." She nodded. "We know. That's why it matters." Word spread, again. But this time, there was no scandal, no firing, no outrage, just reflection. Veterans started coming in more often. Not the protest, but the bank. They said it felt safe now, like someone had put respect back into the room. A high school teacher across town brought a civics class to read the plaque during lunch. Local news ran a short human interest piece titled, "The Man Behind the Quiet Metal." It ended with no interview, just a photo of Boone standing beside the wall, hands folded behind his back, head slightly bowed. He didn't need the microphone. The moment already spoke. And then, one morning in early spring, Charles Boone didn't show up at the memorial. Not at the bank. Not at the bench. And by noon, the Glenview VFW had posted a notice. "We are sad to share that Charles N. Boone passed peacefully in his sleep last night. He was 84. He served. He led. He never asked to be seen, but now we will never look away." That night, candles lined the sidewalk outside Glenview First Union. The branch closed early without announcement. Every teller, every clerk, every security guard left a note, folded neatly and placed beneath the plaque. Some said, "Thank you." Others just left dog tags, old photos, worn patches. The next morning, the Treasury Department issued a national bulletin. Medal of Honor recipient Charles Boone has passed. Full honors to be rendered. The ceremony was private. Boone had requested that. No cameras. No broadcasts. But someone, no one knows who, placed a final envelope on the bench where he used to sit. Inside, a copy of the check that had been shredded. Not reissued. Just preserved. And a note in Secretary Reynolds' handwriting. "You didn't ask to be remembered. But now we can't forget." A week later, Glenview First Union quietly renamed the customer waiting area. A single brass sign now hangs over the leather chairs and coffee counter, the Boone Room for those who served in silence. And every Veterans Day since, the line out the door stretches past the sidewalk, not because the bank is running a promotion, but because the community finally learned how to see. Not just the uniform, not just the medal, not just the plaque, but the man who never asked for a stage, and yet changed everything just by showing up. Boone never gave a speech. But if he had, it might have sounded something like this. Respect doesn't come with a badge. It comes with how you treat the quiet ones, the ones who don't shout, the ones who see more than they'll ever say. Because sometimes the most decorated person in the room is the one you almost dismissed. Until they remind you kindly, firmly, that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes, it means you weren't listening hard enough.